I've done my due diligent research on this. However, this is a huge and extensive topic that I'm sure there are topics and things that I had to glance over to keep it brief, and I'm sure that our professor can point out a couple of things I've missed and things I've glanced over, but my topic is going to be Brazilian coup d'etat, or the military regime of 1964. A quote that I read when I was doing this research was a day that lasted 21 years. I'm going to cover a little bit of some historical context, before, during, after, and its impact. Now, a quick overview. This is going to be a good state of the world situation before I cover the situation in Brazil. It was a clash between the United States and the USSR in China, or the Soviet Union in China, and their fight of communism against capitalism in the Americas. And now these are a couple of names you should keep an eye out for. Getúlio Vargas was a president around the 1930s. He kind of helped lay the groundwork for this coup to happen. The next is President João Goulart, or his nickname Jumbo, just a combination of his first and last name. He was a very communist president that even further helped shape the groundwork for the coup. And Humberto de Alencar Castelo Branco was the first general president during the regime. And he's mostly famous just because he was the first president to be in place during the coup. Now, for background context, the Cold War was escalating between the US and the Soviet Union. And again, a clash of capitalism versus communism in the Americas, the Soviet Union and China trying to root it in Latin America, while the US fighting tooth and nail to keep it out of the countries of just Latin America. Now, on January 1st, 1959, Cuba wins a communist revolution that lasted 5 years, that was funded by the USSR and China. Now, shortly after this, Brazilian revolutionaries started going to Cuba to learn guerrilla tactics on how to overthrow a nation, not just any nation, the biggest and most powerful country in the nation in Latin America, which is Brazil. Now, I don't know if many of you are aware, but Brazil is the biggest country in South America. But how big is it? First of all, it's ranked 5th in the largest country in the world, only behind China and the US. It borders 10 countries around South America. And if we were to put Brazil on top of the US, it's massive. I mean, it is gigantic, and the power it has is undeniable. Now, a couple of events before the coup, American society during this time, Lyndon B. Johnson was declaring war on poverty, the Vietnam War was an all-time high in the US, and Martin Luther King making its civil rights movement throughout the country. Beginnings of the conflict was the Soviet Union, again, influencing Cuba and just really Latin America as a general with their communist ideas, and Cuba fell to communism in 1959. Now, one big event that sparked the coup in general was the Bay of Pigs invasion. Very quick, it was just Russia's attempt to put nuclear warheads in Cuba, which America did not like, and this was a big groundwork for the coup. Now that I gave you the geopolitical context of the world, now these next slides are just going to be focused on Brazil. One big thing that happened just a couple of days before, remember the coup was in March 18th, on March 31st, but on March 18th, over 500,000 Brazilians took to the streets of São Paulo, one of the biggest cities in Brazil, led by the Catholic Church, to do what is called the March of the Family with God for Liberty. Ultimately, it was a cry for help of the Brazil's citizens to asking for military intervention in the government, which was getting influenced by communist ideals. And the picture here, if I were to translate, the sign says, "Brazil will not be a new Cuba." Now, keep in mind that during this time, from the 1920s to the 80s, Brazil was heavily limited on communication. The main way of communicating was through radio and newspapers. Newspapers were the main form. Radio was more for not the wealthy, but if you were more well off in terms of money. So news were very slow to spread. So the effects and the news of the coup wasn't known throughout Brazil until many years later, which which 85% of the country was rural. So very small, concentrated cities were populated and felt the coup firsthand. Now, during a couple events prior to the coup, President Getúlio Vargas is elected in 1930s, and his political ideals are aligned with National Socialism. National Socialism is also what Hitler believed in. Not necessarily Getúlio Vargas and Hitler are completely different people, however, just what they believed in National Socialism was very aligned. Now, Getúlio Vargas stayed in office for 15 years until the end of World War II, pushing his National Socialist ideals throughout the country. But while this was happening, the Soviet Union and China were pushing their communist ideas to Brazil, and just in turn towards the Western Hemisphere as a whole. Now, after Vargas steps down, he returns in 1951, where he remains in office to 1954. Now, during this time, his ideals are a lot more focused on communism, exactly what the military is trying to fight against. So the military doesn't like that, and they surround the presidential palace where Getúlio Vargas is in, forcing him to come out so he can be arrested. However, he does not want to do that, and one of his last quotes before he dies, if I were to translate here, he says, "Serenely, I take the first step towards eternity and leave life to enter history." And he shoots himself in the chest, killing himself in the presidential palace. However, afterwards, in 1961, despite the military's attempts to stop communism, it begins hitting Brazil hard. And after the US catches wind of this, and again, keep in mind, the US does not want communism in the Americas at all, so they send CIA agents and officials to Brazil to help the Brazilian military to make a regime countrywide. And so from 1964 to 85, for 21 years, what was supposed to be a quick military intervention turned out to be an entire regime, where the government appointed, where the military appointed government officials as they saw fit, to the point where they completely closed the Supreme Court and Congress, fired hundreds of officials, and maintained power through executive orders, including appointment of mayors, governors, congressmen, and senators. These are a couple pictures showing the different sides. If you look at the left side, is actually a march that happened a little bit after the military took over. Remember, there was the march beforehand, and now the Catholic Church led another march, over 1 million people in another big city of Brazil called Rio de Janeiro, celebrating the coup, celebrating the military victory. However, on the top right, you see, if I were to translate, it says killer dictatorship. There was, again, lots of backlash and people speaking against this regime. And one big thing that the military did as a fear factor, they would park their tanks and drive them throughout the cities just to impose their military power on the country. Many Brazilians saw this coup as a betrayal of their democratic values and their rights. Thousands that spoke against communism were censored, surveilled, persecuted, tortured, and even exiled from their country. And because of that, also the media was under very strict military control, censoring all sorts of entertainment and media, banning all sorts of communism, just keeping it as close to their military ideals as they wanted. They could do virtually anything they wanted in the country. However, despite the many negative things that happened in the entire history of Brazil, as from beginning to present, the country exploded like never before. If you lived life normally, and I say that if you really kept to yourself, if you didn't speak out against communism, if you were minding your business, cost of life and just life in general was affordable. There was an exponential economic growth, very high security, again, the military cruising the streets, setting curfews, and because of that, you had an extremely low crime rate and affordable lifestyles as well. Now comes an era that Brazil calls the economic miracle. Many things happened that exploded Brazil's economy. One of those is called Petrobras. If I were to just take the words, is petrol in Brazil, or if you were to call it in English, the Brazilian Petroleum Corporation. It is the 9th world's largest oil and gas company, worth around $130 billion today. It was funded by President Getúlio Vargas in 1953, along with international investors and financial institutions. Another one of these economic miracles was the Itaipu power plant. Only ranked now only second largest power plant, just behind the Three Gorges Dam in China. This beast of a plant produces around 90 to 100 terawatts of energy per year. Just to put in perspective, 1 terawatt is 1 trillion watts. You can do the math for how much 100 terawatts is. And this was a joint effort between Paraguay and Brazil. This plant produces almost 90% of Paraguay's electricity and around 10 to 15 of Brazil's. I was actually lucky enough to be there myself, and just a couple of kilometers before, you have the Iguazu Falls, which is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. If you were to look on the left side here, this is Brazil, and on this side is Argentina. Where the dam is a 3-way border between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, but here is just the 2 countries. Again, I was there myself, I think in 2012 or so. On the picture to my right, this falls here is called the Devil's Throat. It is the strongest and most dangerous current in all of the falls, and just being there, you feel so small, so significant. And I remember being with tour guides, and they had to just scream for us to hear anything over just the crashing waves. It was an awesome experience. And again, I was also there in the dam. I saw the floodgates opening. It was a wonderful experience. Now, another economic miracle was the Rio-Niterói Bridge. It connected 2 cities, Rio de Janeiro and Niterói. This huge expanse of water is part of the Atlantic Ocean, and the only way, before this bridge happened, the only way of traversing it was through ferry, which was time-consuming, was slow, and just, it was costly. And because this bridge was built, which really is almost a wonder in engineering, it is almost 9 miles worth of bridge connecting these 2 countries, these 2 cities, I'm sorry. And after this was built, Rio de Janeiro exploded to what it is now. Fun fact, there's 2 wonders of the world in Brazil, the Iguazu Falls I showed you, and Christ Redeemer in Brazil, the big Jesus Christ statue. And this bridge boosted employment, lowered inflation, and just as a whole, just boomed Brazil's economy. Now, as for the rest of Brazil, again, news are slow to spread. So all of these things, especially the rural areas, only started feeling these effects after the expansion and urban growth started spreading to the country. Because of the regime, Brazil went from an agricultural country to an industrial country almost in a flat blink of an eye. Now for the aftermath. Are there pros, are there cons? Absolutely. For the cons, hundreds were killed, thousands were persecuted, exiled, tortured by this regime, many devastated families, thousands of human rights abuses, the complete lack of democracy because the military was taking over. Teachers and professors were surveilled without consent to find those supporting communism and punished accordingly. Now for the pros, it's undeniable. There was a gigantic boom. You had universities, hospitals, railroads connecting major areas of Brazil, international banks with free flow of money, not only between the US, but just throughout to other countries in Europe. And this boosted, just skyrocketing the economy of Brazil. And because of the massive outputs of resources, the ports also started thriving and flourishing. Now, was this a history-altering event? To that I say absolutely. If communism did root itself in Brazil, the conflicts between the US and South America would have been devastating. And if communism was rooted in Brazil, all of the countries in Latin America would inadvertently have been affected by it, further causing conflict between the US. And this would make the Soviet Union and China have a big upper hand in the United States, and war would sure to ensue. This is a very quick and abridged timeline. 1930s, Getúlio Vargas is elected president. 1945, he steps down with the World War II ending. 51, he returned as president, now more communist aligned. In 61, communism makes the waves countrywide, and now CIA gets sent to Brazil to start the coup, and from 64 to 85, Brazil is under military governance. Now for its effects on the US, foreign trade and alliances skyrocketed between the 2 countries. Effects in Brazil, the country was and still is consolidated as a geopolitical powerhouse in South America in alignment with the US. and effects on the Brazilian population, there was a gigantic sense of national unity. And there was also amnesty granted to exiled Brazilians, meaning they could return back to their home country. And Brazilian culture would undoubtedly have been much different without the alliance of the United States. Now, because I'm a music major and I adore music, I can't help but bring this to y'all's attention. Despite the growth and the overwhelming positives of the regime, many people spoke out against it, especially musicians and songwriters, which were censored by the military. And they were very anti-military and spoke against the oppression placed by them. A couple of names, there were many, many people, but a couple of those is Caetano Veloso, Chico Buarque, and what you could almost call the Michael Jackson of Brazil, Elis Regina. God rest her soul, she passed not a couple of years ago. She is a great, great singer. Now, if you think Hunger Games, the fight against a government and really fueled by music, there was a big anthems. And I mean, are you coming to the tree? The big anthem, the fingers, the whistling. One of these anthems for Brazilians that were supporting communism was a song by Geraldo Vandré. The song, and I translate, is called "To Not Say I Didn't Speak of the Flowers." This is an interpretation to English. If I were to translate it literally, it doesn't make much more sense. And I quote, "There are armed soldiers, loved or not, almost all of them lost with guns in hands. In the garrisons they're taught an old lesson, to die for the country, to live without reason. Come, let's act. To sit idly is worth nothing. Those who understand the present make the future. They don't wait for things to happen." Now, in conclusion, I want to close by just saying why I decided to choose this topic. It's for a couple of reasons, but one is to just show the overwhelming positives of this regime, despite many people speaking out against it today. Again, were there bad things, were there cons? Absolutely, but the positives cannot be overlooked. This is also a pivotal point in my birth country's history, changing it to what it is now. If the regime did not happen, the country would be completely different for a multitude of reasons. And also to show that for any event or situation in the world, no matter how violent or how cruel it is, there is an upside, there's a bright side to this. You just have to be willing to find it. So, are we excited?